Hey everyone, just a reminder that our group read for the Devils over on Discord is still going on for the next couple weeks, so if you wanted somewhere to drop in and discuss the book, a link is in the description. Also, I've just released the 4th chapter for my webcomic Nocturnal. It was a bit late, but I don't expect there to be a delay on the next chapter. That's it, huh? We're some kind of The Devils by Joe Abercrombie. This was really exciting. You know, Joe Abercrombie, if you've been following the channel, is one of my favorite all-time fantasy authors. But about 100% of that status can be attributed to the First Law series. He had a brief stint into young adult stuff with the Shattered Seas trilogy, but you know, it's really the First Law that has made Abercrombie such a beloved author. But here we are with his latest book, the first installment in a brand new adult fantasy series. It is one that I just finished, and one that I have quite some stuff to say about. So The Devils takes place in Europe. Our Europe, though not quite. It's sort of like an alternate reality, you know, where Jesus was a woman. They got some, like, magical creatures and sorcerers running around. It's familiar, but still a kind of unique spin on things. We are thrown into quite the tumultuous time where a schism in the church has left things very unstable. The Empress of Troy has just died, and her 5 sons are fighting for the throne, and there's always the constant threat of elf attacks. The story begins by following Brother Diaz, who is a monk who has arrived at the holy city, and he is given quite the tall task to travel to the city of Troy and install a new empress on the throne. This supposed heir is Alex, who is essentially a street urchin, and she is discovered, and everyone's like, hey, wait a minute, are you the lost heir to the throne of Troy? And everyone's like, I don't know, is she? Whatever, let's get her there anyway. Brother Diaz is not going alone, though. He is to be accompanied by a special group of misfits. The Devils are known as such because that's kind of what they are. Facilitated by Jacob of Thorn, an immortal knight, and Baptiste, a mercenary woman, they consist of 4 prisoners who have been enslaved by a magical papal binding and are often tasked with carrying out some dirty work for the church. You have Baron Rickard, an ancient vampire, Balthazar, a necromancer, Sunny, an elf who can turn invisible, and of course, Viga, a werewolf. And The Devils is the story of these 8 characters as they journey to Troy. And it's not a particularly easy journey, because remember those 5 brothers that I mentioned? They sort of catch wind that someone is on the way to Troy to, you know, take the throne that they believe to be rightfully theirs. They are very wealthy, have a lot of influence, and quite frankly, aren't going to stand for this. Now, much like the setting of this book, you know, familiar but unique, in comparison to Abercrombie's other works, I found The Devils to feel familiar, but also quite different. It has so many elements that I have come to expect from Joe Abercrombie. A very rich, detailed, brutal world, full of very entertaining and witty characters with a ton of depth, amazing visceral action scenes, a breakneck pace, always keeping you on its toes, with several twists and turns in the plot. All stuff I've come to expect, and all stuff that I'm very happy to say is still intact here. But what I wasn't really expecting was how not grimdark this book was. Going from his other books, which are usually so bleak and can be such downers, I was pleasantly thrilled to discover just how funny a book The Devils is, and how, as dark as its subject matter can sometimes be, there was always this uplifting sense of hope that would shine through far more than anything in the First Law. And I like that. I like how this book was not trying to be the First Law. It was clearly trying to be its own thing, and I think for the most part, Joe pulled it off incredibly well. As I said, this is a wildly entertaining story. You know, I think with the Age of Madness trilogy, Joe really mastered pacing. He's able to fit so much detail in his books while keeping them at a super fast pace, so you're never finding yourself getting bored. And as we follow the Devils on their journey here, there are so many insane things constantly happening, but it's never at any sacrifice to the character development. And we have to talk about those characters, because this is a pretty massive ensemble cast. All 8 of our main characters play significant roles in the story, story, none of them get sidelined here. And that's great because they're all really fantastic. The best Abercrombie characters, they're always so morally gray and they're witty and have, mysterious qualities to them. All of these characters fit into those categories while still feeling very distinct. Obviously not just in their personalities and their upbringings, but like we got some just straight up magical creatures in here, which really spice things up. Not only was learning about them interesting, but seeing how they fight and they handle conflict, also great stuff. A lot of these characters are here voluntarily, a lot of them are kind of forced by this papal binding, which, will essentially like injure them if they don't obey the Pope's orders. It leads to a lot of bickering and disagreements among the group. You're always questioning whether or not you can trust certain ones. I was a bit worried at first because, all of these characters are together for most of the book, and it felt like it would be pretty hard to juggle all of these, but, thankfully there are sections of the book where the characters are separated and we get to see them, play off different ones, and these sections, really help to focus in on these characters and build them up more. It's honestly very hard for me to pick a favorite main character in this book because they're all so great. And even just in the first book of this series, some of the development that has happened has already been quite significant and fantastic. And I mentioned this is a very funny book. Yeah, these characters are absolutely hilarious. There is so much comedy in this book. I was kind of shocked. First Law always had like its funny, witty moments, but this entire book is full of them. And since early on I accepted that this was not going to be as bleak as the First Law, I was all for it. It's not just in the witty banter, but like there are just straight up some hilarious scenes and scenarios that play out. My absolute favorite moment involved Shaxep, Duke of the Beneath. Incredible, fantastic, unexpected. Whew. With how well these characters were defined and fleshed out, I mean, just following them on the journey was so entertaining and fun. And this attachment you form with the characters makes you a lot more invested when they get to the end of their journey, and the stakes start to get significantly raised. As you would expect, the climax of this book is quite insane, and the way these characters are all balanced out, it just works so well to just make super entertaining and satisfying stuff. However, this does lead me to one complaint I had with the Devils. You see, so much time was spent fleshing out our main cast, which, great. But I feel like when it comes to the actual antagonists of this story, of which there are a lot, not enough was really done to make them stand out like I usually come to expect from Abercrombie characters. A lot of them are just kind of comically evil, and their motivation is pretty much that they're evil. And it, did make for some entertaining stuff, but it did often feel like some opportunities were missed. There's a lot of great and surprising stuff that happens with these villains, but they just feel so much more one-dimensional compared to the other characters. So, I don't think anything with them really hit as hard as it probably should have. I don't think this is a massive issue, because, this is still book one. There's still some potential to grow some of these characters to become a lot more interesting and complex. But just based on this first book, it was one area I think let me down a little bit. That being said, I was a big fan of where this book left off, and I'm really excited to see where the second book will take these characters. I really like Abercrombie's political stuff. It seems like that might be a direction the second one goes in. Just a lot to be excited here. So yeah, overall, The Devils, absolute banger, was never in question. I wouldn't call it my absolute favorite of Abercrombie's, but that is such a high bar, and I can still safely say that this book is easily worth your time if you are a fan of fantasy stuff. Even if for whatever reason you weren't super big on the First Law, this has a very different tone, very different type of story, might still be worth checking out. I'm giving this one 4.5 stars, which was the same score I gave The Blade itself, and every book after that was 5, so yeah, fingers crossed. So with that, thank you all so much for watching. Leave your thoughts on anything Abercrombie in the comments down below. I have a few things coming up. Of course, I'll be covering the newest Stephen King book that comes out next week. I'll have a new Discworld video out soon. And I think now that I have officially completed Joe Abercrombie's bibliography, I should maybe do something about that. So, I'll see you guys then.